we're ready.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome you to the September 29th study session of the University City Council. Our first subject to be covered is tree removal. Mr. Rose.
Honorable Mayor and council members, this item is a presentation on our current tree removal program. Parks and Recreation Director Darren Dunkel will be given the presentation. Mr. Dunkel.
Thank you, Mr. Rose, Mayor, members of council. Well, trying to get to the next slide here. Basically, go over our tree removal policy. Our tree inspections are handled through our forestry division. We have a forestry supervisor who's ISA certified arborist. We also have a tree trimmer who's also a certified arborist. Also, our forester is TRAC certificate, which is the tree risk assessment. And most of our tree inspections are initiated either by a resident request or by staff request. Basically, we go by the ANSI 300 standards, which are the American National Standards Institute standards for doing tree risk assessments. There are 3 different levels of the risk assessment. Level 1 is just a limited visual assessment, a drive-by or a walk-by assessment of the tree. Level 2, they do a 360-degree visual assessment. They look at the crown, they look at the trunk, they look at the roots and the other site conditions. Then level 3 is the most intense, where they'll do aerial assessments, look at decay, the root crown, and if needed, they'll go into drilling or tomography. And basically tomography is just taking a cross section of the tree, either through like an X-ray or ultrasound, to kind of see if it's hollow or any other issues pertaining to that tree. Once you go through one of those 3 assessments, they look at the risk category levels, and you look at, what is the likelihood of failure? Is it imminent? Is it probable, possible, or improbable? Based on that, and our assessment is completed, our forestry supervisor will notify the resident if there's an issue or not. And if so, they'll let them know what actions will be taken, or if there's not a problem, why it's not being taken. And once all this has been completed by the forestry supervisor, if there's work that's needed to be done, based on the assessment, they will schedule that. And the scheduling, basically depends what they find. If they find out that the tree is a major hazard and it's real possible that it's going to fall or hurt someone, then we get out there immediately. If not, based on the assessment, it will be scheduled and thrown in the schedule of other trees like that, and we will systematically go down our list and start removing the trees. Now, we do have an occasion where people either like the fact that we're removing the tree, they don't like the fact to remove the tree, and in some cases we have people who want us to remove the tree. However, due to the risk assessment, the tree is healthy, living, not causing any problems. And if that is the case, the resident has a right to appeal, and they can appeal to the Urban Forestry Commission. To be able to do that, they must file it in writing to the city manager and myself, and it'll be placed on the Urban Forestry Commission's agenda within 10 days after the notification. And the appeal has to be based on the claim that the regulations or rules that we have adopted have been incorrectly interpreted or applied. And they, in their appeal, have to put down what the specific reason why that there is an appeal. Once they meet that criteria, it will be put on the agenda for the next Forestry Commission. They will listen to the case, and they may reverse, affirm, or modify the order. And they will render their decision by a majority vote after listening to that. Whatever, as of right now, per ordinance, whatever their vote is and the outcome, that's what it is. Basically, you're looking at our street trees and why they are essential. Here's on your screen, there's a list of things of why we feel they're important. Other than the environmental benefits, we look at it, from a city standpoint, stormwater management, that the roots of the trees soak up a lot of the water that might be on site. We look at some of the energy savings of our residents by the shade it presents, and also with the street pavement life. The more shaded a street is, the longer life of the street itself. And it also leads into, crime and safety. People feel safer around things that are aesthetically pleasing, those sort of things. It also impacts property value and those sort of things. Does anyone have any questions regarding this?
And well, I guess I will start. And first of all, thank you, Mr. Dunkel, or should I say Director Dunkel, for the information and the presentation. What I wanted to say is, and again, looking at your presentation, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to deal with two things at once and trying to manipulate my email and this screen discussion. But anyway, what I will say is this. I thank the city manager for putting this presentation together, because since I've been on council, the problem that I've always faced with residents is that they feel that we consider the trees more than we consider our residents and taxpayers. And what I've always found is that in most cases, a lot of the decisions are based on the tree. And the real question is, or the problem is that if it's a healthy tree, probably 100% of the time, or 9 out of 10 times, the decision that's made is that the tree is healthy and no action will be taken. That's what happens most of the time. And so, in looking at that process, it seems that there really is no recourse or no consideration to the resident, because as it states on your appeal process, that an appeal shall be based on a claim that the regulations or rules adopted have been incorrectly interpreted or applied, and shall specify the reason. Well, in most cases, they have different reasons than they are adopted by our ordinance. And our arborist or our specialist may have in fact followed the ordinance and our standards, but that's not necessarily the reason that the resident has. And so again, if the resident's recourse and appeal is through the arborist and through the Forestry Commission, then basically there is no real representation or voice for that resident. And I do want to say that myself and Council Member McMahon had a discussion this afternoon that went very well, and I'll let him take over from now. Because, and the reason I say that is because of time, and I want to get as much in on this as we can. So I'll let him take over from here.
Thank you, Councilman Smotherson. And we did have a conversation, and that's one of the reasons why this presentation was brought to a study session, was to discuss the process and what it's based on. And I think what Blaine was hitting at, when you look at the appeals process, and I was the liaison to the Urban Forestry Commission at one time, and most of the residents that came in weren't meeting the information that the forester would be able to provide head on, because most of their questions about their tree that was in front of their house was their own personal opinion. And so they really weren't in a position to argue with what the forester said, and they were kind of at a disadvantage. And it really wasn't a meaningful hearing in a way, because they're coming at it from a different perspective. And so today I was looking at our ordinances, and I didn't realize that any individual can get a forestry activity permit that would allow any person to prune, spray, or remove a city tree. That permit application would be given to the forester for approval. But I think if we, maybe tweak some of our rules to give that direction to the residents, to tell them, you need to, if you apply for this, you could get this removed it's the information that you would need to instruct the city on why you would want it removed more than just your personal opinion. It might move it in the right direction. It would also give more evidence to the, if our forester still came back and said, no, we're not going to remove the tree, there could still be an appeal. But now you would have two different opinions from the experts for the commission to listen to make a maybe a more informed decision to spell that out. And so I think that process could be tweaked a little bit. Boyne and I also discussed that if there's economic issues, why someone wouldn't do that. Maybe if they succeed at the appeal, we could refund them the cost of their study that they had to come up with. It also might help if they have to get the study and do it in that fashion. We might eliminate some of these requests because they might get somebody they trust that they picked that tells them it doesn't need to move forward the way they thought. So I thought that was an interesting thing. And lastly, I looked at some other cities' tree removal policies, and there's processes where you could get an exception to the rules. And it would be much like what our developments have to do when they want to do a development and they have to remove trees. They'll pay for the cost of removal and develop a mitigation plan. We might be able to explore to tell a resident, look, the commission's ruled this way. You want an exception? Then if you want to remove the city tree, you're going to pay for the removal, and you'll also have to develop a mitigation plan. At least it gives them an option to get the result they're looking for, and we can work cooperatively possibly through that process. Just some ideas that Boyne and I kicked around to maybe make this a little more meaningful, because I think the other result is to basically, if there are trees and we trust our forester, you got such a high percentage of these appeals never succeeding. Do we really have an appeal procedure, or should we just say, these are our trees, our forester has made this decision, and that's the way it's going to be? I think that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, and I wanted to say one more thing before anybody else jumps in. City Manager Rose passed out some pictures that I took, and I'm hoping that all of the council was able to look at those or view those pictures. And if you weren't, I'm not sure if they're available now, but what I wanted to explain is what those pictures were. That was 1445 Sheraton back in 2018 when I was on council. Yes, this is these are the pictures. And what I wanted to explain is I was the morning after this happened, I was called and I went out and actually took these are my pictures that I took. And I wanted to say this in reference to why this is important to this meeting. That's a city tree. And if you could show the next picture, this is a city tree, and can continue with the next one, please. And this resident asked to have this tree cut down because they felt it was dangerous. The inspector, and again, no fault to our inspection, no fault to our arborist or anything, determined that it was a healthy tree and it didn't need to be cut down. And this is what happened pretty much right after, not far after that inspection. The tree literally fell and crashed into their house. And so I just wanted to show that as an example that this is something that people are really concerned about. And when they make their report, they may in fact, as Councilmember McMahon stated, they may not actually meet our criteria, but it happens. So just wanted to give you an example of something that happened, and this was back in 2018. Thank you.
Okay, before anyone else jumps in, could you please let me know if you would like to speak so that we have a little organization to questions here this night. Does anyone, I'm trying to go through many small photos here because I can't see everyone all at once. So is there any member of council? I believe that Mr. Hales and Mr. Clay want to speak. I don't see.
Can we bounce out of this question screen to get all of us in?
Yeah, Darren, if you would stop sharing
There you go.
There we go.
Oh, by the way, I do believe, just for everyone's purpose, Kristen Sabacca, who is the Chair of Urban Forestry, is also joining us this evening, just in case you guys, I know we weren't on a full screen, so we couldn't see everybody. Kristen, thank you for joining us. And please feel free as we move forward, if you have questions or comments, we'd like to have your perspective as well. Mr. Hales, would you go first, please?
Yeah, so I just concluded serving as council liaison to the Urban Forestry Commission. Kristen, it's good to see you again. I think I have a couple of questions. One is for Director Dunkel. So in my term on the Urban Forestry Commission, one of the things that they address, and I don't know if it's relevant to what Mr. Smotherson just pointed out, but I remember our new forester has come up with a very, very extensive and detailed list of trees and areas where trees can go. And I remember just from looking at these photographs that was a very large tree in a very tiny tree lawn. And is that something that, is that a tree or an example of a tree that should be maybe considered differently today than it was in 2018 because of the size of the tree and the tree lawn that it's at?
Councilmember Hills, to address that, I'm not an arborist or a certified arborist to answer that. However, getting back to the tree list, yes, we created an extensive list of trees prior to the forester and myself coming on board with the city. It was a very small list of trees, so we've expanded that and we put them in the categories. So as we are moving forward and removing trees and replacing them, we are replacing them with trees that fit that site.
Okay, thank you. And then the other question I have about process, we have been a Tree City USA city for a very long time. How does that impact the role of the Urban Forestry Commission? And does it impact the process that we have in terms of the appeals?
No, there is no impact from the Tree City USA. Actually, there's only like 4 criteria. Tree City USA. One is that you have to have an Arbor Day celebration. You have to spend $2 per capita on forest-related items and those sort of things. But none of that gets in our rules or regulations on how we govern our trees and how we do things. It's a designation than it is any kind of rules or policies.
But am I incorrect? I thought the commission was required to meet a certain number of times per year. Is that something by code?
I'm sorry, that is one of the criteria. Like as Tree City USA, you must meet, I think, 6 times per year as a commission or a board or that kind of stuff. And you have to have either a supervisory type board or professional staff. And we have pretty much both, that we have a commission as well as we have professional staff.
Okay, thank you.
Play. Had you had a comment earlier or no?
Oh, yes, I did. Thank you, Mayor Crow. I wasn't sure if you were talking to me. Thank you for the presentation, Director Dunkel. So this is very personal to me in that 2 weeks ago, I had the city tree cut down in front of my house. So this process is very, very fresh to me, shall we say. One question I had, so there have actually been 2 city trees cut down on my street, I would say in the past 5 weeks. Both of them, including the one in my house, in front of my house, the limbs are gone, which is wonderful because we're really where the hazard lies in most situations. There's still about 15 feet of trunk though in front of both down the street from me and in front of my home. And I'm just wondering I understand this may be done in stages, but just kind of asking honestly, as a representative on council and for my wife, when does the trunk stuff come down?
Councilmember Clay, yes, we do things in stages. We have a 2-man crew that goes out and takes care of hazard trees. And the first thing they do is take off the limbs and dispose of that. And they do come back and they schedule to remove the trunks. Now, the timeframes maybe change if there's if your trunk of your tree is not considered hazardous at the time, that there is another call that we get that there is a imminent danger of a tree. They go address that and they come back. And we do have a number of those, and we try to get them in order and come back and get those. I do not have a time frame to tell you at this point when your particular trunk.
No, not asking
but
for
that-
my wife would like to know, but not asking for my tree specifically, but just generally, is it a month lag? Is it 60 days? Just what?
It just all depends on the workload and how many
Okay.
of the tree stumps and trunks that they're out there.
Certainly not asking that anything be expedited. We'll fall into the workflow as it comes to us, but just curious about that.
Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Clay, if I could just respond, it would be unusual, I think, for our crews to leave a trunk in excess of 60 days. Typically, the reason I believe that the director is hesitant to give you a time frame is because it's difficult to judge when there's going to be some sort of storm activity.
Right.
And that could result in, the creation of dangerous situations where they need to go and more immediately address.
And am I correct that there has been a request or will be a request for more dollars for tree trimming? Am I accurate in that?
Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Clay, in this year's budget, you might recall the council allocated more funds towards tree pruning. You may recall there was a brief discussion about the fact that the city had not really done tree pruning for about 10 years. So there was going to need to be a catch-up period. And Director Dunkel and I share with you kind of that plan for catching up and then at some point leveling off. So I would say for at least the next probably 5 to 6 years, there's going to be a recommendation to add more funding in tree pruning than what you typically would once things start to level off.
Thank you.
Kristen, and you are muted at the present time.
Well,
There you
it looks like Mr. Rose maybe wanted to finish up something, so
Oh, I'm sorry. Gregor, did you have more?
Did you have some?
The only other comment I wanted to make, certainly with regards to Mayor Pro Tem's pictures, and also to Councilmember Hale's question, I think it's very difficult to determine, when a large tree like that is going to topple over. And sometimes it's related to the size of the right of way that it's in, but not necessarily. I think that the staff tried to do a very admirable job of going out and investigating, identifying when a tree is creating a hazardous situation. But you as a council are probably aware that we have more than 40,000 trees in University City. So trying to know exactly when that tree life has expired can be quite a challenge. But I do believe that the investment in tree pruning and just greater attention will pay dividends in the long run and hopefully prevent some of these situations from happening.
Thank you, Gregory. Can we go to Kristen now?
Can't hear you.
I believe he was asking for Chairman Sabacca.
Kristen, Kristen, I apologize.
No problem. I'll just briefly say that I don't have the regulations and policies in front of me, but in the decisions that we make, we are completely guided by the rules isn't the right word, but the policies and criteria that this commission was established under, and we're following those based on information that the homeowners provide us, as well as the information that Mr. Kaiser and Mr. Dunkel present to us. And basically it is, if the tree is healthy and is not causing actual danger to humans or significant danger to property, the tree is to be given the benefit of the doubt and left untouched, despite the fact it may be a nuisance. And I have sympathized tremendously with many of these homeowners, because I have a bunch of sycamore trees in front of my house that are owned by the county, and they're a big pain in the neck. And honestly, if I could get them replaced with something else, I'd go, yeah, sure, please do it. But I think it's important to know that the commission follows the guidelines and procedures that we've been directed to follow. And whether the tree is a nuisance to the homeowner or not, as of right now, isn't a factor that we're supposed to use in making the decision about the tree. My fellow commission members have expressed concern at our last meeting, expressed real concern that those criteria may be undermined if there's additional appeal processes that take into account other factors than what we've been operating under. So I just want to kind of make that statement from the commission as a whole. I'm happy
Thank
to
you.
answer questions if I can.
Yeah, a couple of things I'd like to throw in. I think with all the years I've been on council, that may be the only commission I've never served as the liaison to, so I don't have much of a working knowledge. I guess one question I'd ask, and maybe it's more fair to ask Darren, but I'm happy for Darren or Kristen, either one, and that is how many appeals do we have a year? First off, how many requests come through, and then how many appeals do we have? Is it 10? Is it 50? Is it?
Mayor Crow, I've been here a year and a half and we've had zero. We've had zero official requests and nothing as such, nothing has come in front of the commission. Prior to me coming to the city, I'm not for sure how many were brought forward, but nothing in the past year and a half.
I've been on the commission, maybe I'm going into my third year now. And we've had, I would guess, maybe five or six. I don't know, that maybe Mr. Rose knows the exact number, but that's in the time I've been, but there haven't been any recently. Yeah.
Mayor, I was just going to clarify to say there haven't been any new ones. I think that there was certainly one that was a repeat that was brought forward. But to my knowledge, I don't believe there's been any new ones since I've been on board. That's about 3 years now.
And I'm at least amenable to a conversation about it. Not that my opinion is any weighted any more than anyone else's, but I do want to say that I think we have to walk a pretty straight line on this one, because I think we do realize that under a previous administration, this became a little bit more of one that members of council sort of just had things done, and that got a little bit frightening for us and not appropriate. And I think we have to be cautious about that. I also think that probably we may want to go back and see why it was created this way, because I have a feeling it was created this way probably to do just what it is doing right now. So if we broaden the appeal process, I don't know that I mind broadening the appeal process within urban forestry. But what I would really caution my colleagues against is ever having the appeal process leave the commission or the city manager purview and cross over into the council purview. I think that is a can of worms that every one of us would regret at some point in time, because it's always nice to appease one person, but once you go down that pathway, you're appeasing an awful lot of folks, and you've sort of thrown out, if you will, the purpose for why that commission was, one of the reasons that commission was created and one of its mandates through our city. So This one causes me only a little bit of concern because I think we're kind of looking at the upside and not looking at the downside on this one. And I have to agree, I am one of Kristen's neighbors, by the way. And I will be the first to say again, that if I could get rid of those big trees that the county has out on the edge, I'd do it too, just because of what they've got falling from them. But I think they're all pretty healthy as well. And so I kind of live with them and I like the shade. Mr. McMahon.
Just to be clear, nothing I talked about was changing anything to bring it before council. Everything would have been within the forester, our forester and the commission. The application process for a forestry permit is already in our ordinance. So a resident could apply for that right now. And if they got turned down, they could still appeal that decision to the commission. So that's already in our ordinances. I was trying to put some more skin in the game or just provide options for our residents when they feel like they're just not being heard, but not in any way changing the structure that already exists. That wasn't in there in any form. It was basically just saying, it's already in section, what is it, 105? I'll dig it up. 105, 160, paragraph B already says that process is there. And then if you look in the urban forestry calculations, then they could appeal a denial of that permit. So it's already there. I wasn't changing anything except to maybe try to give them the idea that more than saying it's a nuisance, they might have to get somebody, an expert, to say, this is why this tree meeting those ANSI standards needs to be removed. That's giving them some direction, some assistance so that they can present their case in a way that might be more meaningful. That was it.
Hand up, did you?
Oh, I couldn't hear you. You blanked out for a second. But anyway, I want to absolutely agree with Councilman McMahon. In our discussion, no, I agree with him in that we're not trying to change the process that we have, but to broaden it a bit in that we give the residents a path that would be more satisfying to them, because then they hire the expert and then they can present that to the urban forestry. And I'm not trying to bypass urban forestry at all. And I'm not trying to question our inspectors in any way at all. I'm simply trying to give them, the residents, a more satisfying pathway that can kind of resolve their issues. And they may not necessarily be satisfied, or could be, but that way we don't keep having residents, and I hate to say it, that come to every meeting asking to have a tree cut down, because there can be some into their quest, if you understand what I'm saying. So that's it.
Okay, thank you. And we've got one more. We need to wrap this up if we're going to do parking, because we have an outside guest here tonight. Mr. Hales.
Yeah, very quickly, I want to come back to something the city manager said I think is kind of important in this whole process, because I think some of us watch social media, and the point that we have 40,000 trees, like I really look at this that as a community, we're all in this together, and we all can do our part. I know I did well before I was on council. If there's a dead limb, or if there's a tree that looks like it's a problem, the thing that I think we need to encourage people to do is to, call the city, call Darren, call your council member, email somebody, but let us know where the problems are, because there are 41,000 trees and there's 81 miles of streets, and there is no way for the city staff to have eyes on that much real estate. So I think we could probably do a little bit better to encourage that type of thing among our residents, because I know that when people report it, it does get addressed very quickly these days. So.
Thank you. Hearing, if we're good to go, I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Rose.
Mayor, council members, if it's acceptable to you, I will have Director Dunkel work with the Forestry Commission to evaluate the current policy, see if there is room for expansion of the appeal process bring that information back to the mayor and council for consideration at a later date. Okay. For the next item, we have a presentation from Kelly Schaefer with Lockmuir, and she'll be presenting the traffic study that has been presented first to the Traffic Commission. I believe Sinan is, Mr. Appleson is here with us, who has oversight of the parking study. I'm sorry, I think I said traffic study, that can share his insights into the to the process and the findings for the traffic study. But due to the sake of time, I will turn things over to Kelly.
Thank you, Mayor. Or sorry, Mr. Rose. I'll share my screen. Let's see. And let's see, let me hide that. Preparing a presentation just to go over the report that we prepared for the city. So my name is Kelly Schaefer. I'm a senior traffic engineer with Lockmuir Group. I have 11 years of traffic engineering experience in St. Louis. In 2019, the city asked Lockmuir to perform a parking study of the 3 zones highlighted on the slide. The goal of the study was to assess parking conditions, identify any issues, and recommend direct solutions and/or strategies for future management of them. To provide some context to the area and how it was developed, U-City was founded in 1906, and most of its parcels were built before 1935. Personal transportation has evolved since then, as have zoning and parking requirements for properties. Over the years, properties have been modified, increasing the number of residents per unit while not always providing additional parking spaces. U-City is a beautiful, diverse place that attracts a lot of people of different backgrounds and stages in life. So working on this study, it was really important that anything we come up with, it provides a solution that's context sensitive, but it's also forward thinking. Just gonna skip that. So going into zone 1, so starting to introduce them, zone 1 is generally bordered north and south by Vernon and Kingsbury, and east-west by Kingsland, Trinity, and Eastgate. The land uses in zone 1 are more diverse than any of the other ones. Notably, this zone includes the loop. You'll see the commercial uses being depicted in pink. This zone also includes residential areas to the north and south of Del Mar. In those areas, we see mostly multifamily, but also some single family and townhome. And then it's my understanding from talking with staff that WashU is a prominent landowner of the multifamily in this zone, and students are known to live throughout. As for parking, residents have some private off-street. Many do park on street though, as the buildings do not provide as many spaces as our tenants. And just so you know, this study mostly just did the on-street parking, although we did do a visual inspection of, say, Lot 4 and Lot A, and we included it. So because of this zone's proximity to WashU and a lot of the student housing being in this area, we reached out to WashU to get any information we could about their parking policies. We thought this could help complete the picture or maybe just provide some interesting information. WashU provides permits to faculty and students in 5 zones. 4 are shown on this map. 2 other ones, a zone 5. Those are remote campuses. One's further to the north and one's west on Forsyth. The costs for student permits are generally $850 or less, as you can see. All of this information, though, that's available online. We did request additional information from their parking department, and this was received late last week, just after the packets were due. So going off the notes a little bit, we learned that this zoned approach was implemented in 2017. The cost for zones 1 through 4 originally started at $757. So in 4 years, it's gone up 12%. They did not do any changes this year. I think they're trying to learn how to do COVID as well. In total, including zone 5, WashU provides nearly 7,400 parking spaces for permit holders. They also provide 970 visitor and hourly spaces. As far as utilization, WashU shared that the demand for zone 1 is generally high, while other zones have some availability on a typical day. Zone 2, for example, has 50 available spots on average. And then they noted that they make efforts to manage the supply and demand for these zones by permit and people type. So their faculty, their staff, and their visitors. And then they also have a U-Pass that gives Metrolink and bus rides for free. So hopefully some of that was new and insightful. Zone 2, we're centered on Pershing Avenue. The zone goes north to Stratford, south to Forsyth, and then east and west to Hanley and Forest Park. This is mostly single family. Pershing has some commercial near Jackson, but is otherwise predominantly home to multifamily residences. And Zone 3. So located along Forsyth from Forest Park to Big Bend. The western portion of Lindell was also included. This area has mostly multifamily with some commercial to the west. And parking is on and off street for these land uses. And over by Lindell, there is some restricted parking for the cafe and those streets. So I wanted to get a little bit into our data collection method. We needed to first collect data and perform the observations to do our analysis. We did this, data was recorded hourly for each street in each zone. We did this with 2 people per car. Streets were broken up into blocks and the relative utilization of each was recorded as they went. They also did observations the entire time. The biggest benefit to this approach versus a more detailed count, such as license plate recording, was that we were able to do observations during the count and also cover a huge area. Each hour, engineers and planners looked not only for utilization, but if they could recognize the same cars parked on the street all day. So noting if the demand was turning over or not, who was parking in these areas. Was it a personal vehicle or a service van? Who was walking around? Did they look like loop patrons, students, families? And then anything else that could be observed. So noting parking signs and restrictions, illegal parking. You never know what you'll see until you spend that time in the field. So again, this approach was good for collecting a lot of data quickly and to provide a high level picture of parking conditions in these zones. It was also preferable because it is very expensive to do license plate and get an exact turnover rate and utilization rate. So it was also a cost-effective solution. So once we had this all scoped, data collection was scheduled for a typical weekday and weekend in spring 2019. We avoided Easter, Labor Day, and WashU finals and made sure we had favorable weather to represent typical conditions for the city, WashU, and on the loop. Okay. So zone 1 was one of the more complex ones. So we wanted to break it up. Once we saw some of the data, you know, these areas had different characteristics and different parking characteristics as well. So we wanted to break up how we spoke to the area and its recommendations in a simple, clear way. So we have sub areas A, B, and C. So zone 1, we're going to talk probably the most, but once we get to 2 and 3, it goes a little bit quicker. So with zone 1, the highest utilization occurred at 7 p.m. That utilization is shown in the picture. So the darker the line, the higher that demand. In sub area A, some streets do not have much on-street parking. Looking at the hourly data, it was either consistently higher or low. So some streets were parked 50% or less throughout the entire count period. And some were consistently 50 to 75 or even 90% or more. Those particular blocks, we saw those on Clemens, Leland, and Inner Drive. And then trends in this area, we saw that parking gradually increased closer to 7, so it kind of reflected a 9 to 5 commuter pattern. In sub area B, we essentially have the loop. So most streets had high utilization for every hour, but high turnover was also noted, which is good for a district like this. And then in C, we generally saw high utilization throughout the count as well. And it was noted that there was little turnover. On some streets, such as Kingsbury and Melville, we had notes that we saw students driving away from the area between 4 and 6 p.m. though. So we understand that there's a lot of student housing here and suspected non-residential parking. So without closer study for how we did this project or doing on-street interviews, it would be hard for us to know if these were students that were not residents. And they could be someone that lived in the area and just simply headed out after class, or they could be someone parking to get closer to the university. So students have the varied and unpredictable parking patterns. So that would be something to further study if that's a major concern area. And while Washington was very busy, turnover was not necessarily noted, and we didn't have the same notes about students going to and from their vehicles. So it seems like just from our inspection that would be mostly residential parking. Then on the weekend, that wasn't too dissimilar. The sub area A, streets saw higher demand during the week. They also, that were busier then, were also busier on the weekend. The loop, it was also very busy for every count. And we also saw good turnover, say high turnover. And then sub area C was highly parked as well. Utilization dropped some throughout the day, suggesting people were leaving home and heading out. And then coming back to Kingsbury and Melville, we saw lower utilization. So again, it's hard to know exactly what's going on, but if the weekend was more the demand for the people that live there and we saw lower, then that's potentially a sign that there were some students parking there during the day. And then some other general notes. We spent our time in the field looking at and analyzing the parking information available to the public. This was supplemented with some exploratory research, just browsing online. For these results, the overall theme is wayfinding with respect to parking on the loop. And ultimately, there's a lot of opportunity here. In general, we found that signs directing visitors to parking lots were few in number and not always placed in a location that is easy to find and also see. For example, the large signs for lot 4, which is a great place for people to park, given its size and that it's free. It only has signs on Kingsland and Leland, and they can be hard to see with trees. And then online, parking information on the Visit the Loop website, which was the first thing that came up, wasn't featured on the front page. The interactive map has a great location on that front page, and it does have some parking, but not all of it. And then the downloadable map has parking, but it doesn't necessarily tell you that that's where you would find that information. So quickly kind of going into zone 2, highest parking demand occurred at 7. We didn't see much on-street parking at all throughout the hours collected. Pershing, though, has mostly multifamily. That was the exception. Parking didn't change much throughout the day. It stayed around the 50 to 90% range. A few more vehicles showed up closer to 7, making that the peak hour. There was little turnover, so these cars were parked most of the day. The southernmost streets of the zone were Maryland and Westmoreland. So they're the closest to the city of Clayton. Extra attention was given to these streets, understanding that there have been comments about people parking here and walking south into Clayton for their job. On our count days, again, we did a snapshot. We only saw 1 car parked on Maryland from 2 to 7, and then on Westmoreland, a max of 15 were parked at one time at 3 p.m. But we typically, these were home improvement, lawn care, and other home service vehicles. And then on the weekend, demand was generally lower than the weekday. You can even see this decline on Pershing and then Altadena and West Point. And zone 3, so that saw its highest demand at 1. Most of this parking was near the commercial at Lindell and Forsyth, and it reduced after 3 p.m. Demand on Lindell, more for the residential area, was high throughout the day in the 75 to 90% range for all of the studied hours. And then parking on Forsyth was also about the same throughout the day. Weekend was similar to the weekend and weekday. Demand was consistent along Forsyth, and the commercial uses drove the peak hour demand to be at 3 p.m. So all of that said, in summary, the summary is shared on the screen. For the most part, zone 1 and sub areas B and C saw the highest parking demand. This was related to the loop and the high density residential. A really interesting aspect to Park in U City is the impact that the students have. Those working 9 to 5 are more predictable in that they leave in the morning and they come back at night. But students, especially those that live close to the university, can keep their car parked in the same spot. Only move it when they come home if they need to run an area. And that is most of that sub area C. So what can we do with this information? Why do we do this study? Some things that the city can do where there's a non-residential parking is perceived to be happening and is problematic, a residential permit could be considered. The city already does have some of this. System like this could be considered or investigated for some of the streets in sub-area C, Kingsbury or Melville, perhaps. Pros and cons, this allows people who need the street parking to keep their spot. However, the non-residential parking has the potential to relocate to another street. So it could just move the problem. Another forward-moving measure would be to review and revise the city ordinances and make sure that new developments are providing the appropriate amount of parking for their new or modified use. One benefit to our data collection method was that we could record utilization over large areas. Still recommending revisions or taking a look at it. But then now with this report, which streets do not have the extra supply to allow some kind of an exception for where there's a development going on. And then enforcement, creating that culture of compliance, people following the rules. And zone 1, in particular for the loop, there are things that could be done to better utilize our existing spaces, reduce the parking demand, and improve how the system is managed. I talked about policy and residential permits, but another big opportunity is to improve wayfinding to parking and the venues. I traveled solo in Germany last year and I could almost drive into any town and easily find parking. And I didn't know German. So I recommend thinking about wayfinding from the driver's perspective, signs as you enter the loop and along it showing you where you can park, and also updating online resources on the loop website and any apps that people might use. So the slide shows some other strategies and some that the city has already implemented, such as shared parking and the residential permits. And I recommend keeping those in your toolbox. And then zones 2 and 3, if you wanted to look into, there didn't seem to be too much of a problem area, but the implementation of residential permits could be considered, but they might not make a big difference. So that's all I have. Looks like I do have a little bit of time for questions. I was trying to go a little quickly, so I'm sorry if that was a bit much all at once.
I think, do we have Mr. Hales? You're muted. You are muted, Mr. Hales.
All right, got it. Thank you. I have a question regarding, so this came before the Traffic Commission back in December. There was some feedback. It was revised in March. It came back to the Traffic Commission in July, where there was a request to get a track changes for the modifications that were made. Mm-hmm. And out of that meeting in August, when the track changes came to the commission, which I forwarded, on page 24, there was originally a large section about Washington University, university-owned student housing. And it started by saying Washington University and University City's proximity presents challenges to managing on-street parking demand in zone 1. And then it appears, correct me if I'm wrong, but it appears that that entire section that was on page 24 and 25 describing that in some detail disappeared. And I was curious as to, we didn't really have an answer, I think, in that August meeting. I don't know if you all were there, but I'd like to have an understanding or better understanding of why that section was removed. And then secondarily, the commission requested that those 2 pages and the content that was stricken on those 2 pages be added back into it and presented to the council. And I sent this track change to the city manager, who sent it to the council tonight, kind of last minute. I apologize for doing so. I was trying to get caught up on what happened in August.
Okay. So I do have some notes. I sent it to Errol on June 30th. So I have a summary of the comments revised. Page 9, I revised and relocated a sentence about the ownership of the parking garage on Delmar. That was the request of a previous city administrator. Pages 9 through 11, I added information about WashU's parking parking and their parking policies. And page 23, I revised the presentation of observations to emphasize that study observations, though meant to be performed during times which reflect typical conditions, were limited to 2 days in the field. Let's see, and how other more extensive and expensive forms of data collection were not utilized. So now with what you're talking about, I said other markups you'll find in the document. The table of contents was it was one of the track changes.
Right.
And then information about Washou's parking was cut from pages 24 and 25 and relocated to pages 9 through 11 as mentioned in the previous list.
Right, and I did see that it was moved to 9. I guess that I think one of the concerns that I expressed, and I think the commissioners expressed in that last traffic commission meeting, was just removing the statement that WashU and University City's proximity presents challenges to managing street parking, because that is something that is kind of a constant for the residents in the 6,600 blocks of Kingsbury, Washington, and to some degree, some of the other streets in and around there in the first ward.
Okay. I apologize. I did not get that request.
Oh, okay. So that those are my comments. It was overall, I think, fairly thorough. I think the challenge the Park Traffic Commission was hoping to accomplish was what are some possible solutions to this. Was there any consideration of potentially hourly restrictions? I know that we have a residential parking permit system that they can request a certain amount of time each day, up to I think 12 hours. But what about say 2-hour parking from 9 to 5 unless you have a residential permit type thing?
I think that would be something to explore on those southern streets, potentially Washington, and then we saw it mostly on, say, Melville and Kingsbury. That would be the way to address anybody that doesn't belong on the street. So if they look for a new place to park, that's the only new concern potentially. But who knows what's going to happen next year? Hopefully everyone's full-time in school, but
Right.
Traffic and parking has totally changed for the last 6 months. So
Correct. Okay, thank you.
Questions? I know we are running really tight on time. Mr. Cusick, really quick.
Very quickly, Mr. Hales or Mr. Rose, did the Traffic Commission hear any of the recommendations from this report?
They received the whole thing, including this track change log that you received before the meeting.
Did the Traffic, before I was on the Traffic Commission, did they go over any of the recommendations of this report? Should this be sent back to the Traffic Commission for recommendations?
Do you mean like the presentation stuff?
Yes.
I mean, isn't that just bullet points of what's contained in the report, Kelly?
yes, this presentation was given to the Traffic Commission.
Right.
Not the entire study, just mostly the recommendations. Several months, maybe spring. It's been a while.
It was spring and July. It was the the whole packet actually they got.
Yeah, and I was there in the winter or spring. It's been a while.
Mr. Cusick, are you asking in case there's action to be taken, or how?
Yeah, in case there's action can be taken that the Traffic Commission could look at some of these recommendations and then send them back to the full council for clarification on them and to discuss them further, so that we don't have to do that in the study sessions as we are out of time.
That's what they did in their last meeting, was to make their recommendation that this go with the amendments that they requested be made, come to council to be reviewed for consideration. So I don't know if Gregory has an action item for us on this right now.
Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Hales, not at this point. The next step in the process will be for us to finalize the document, to move that forward to council for just acceptance. And what acceptance does is it provides the staff with authority to advance the recommendations that are included in the study.
Thank you to everyone. Kelly, thank you. Kristen, thank you for joining us as well. We're going to take about, we're probably going to start city council just a couple of minutes late. So join you on the other side in just a second. The study session is adjourned and we'll move to a public session in about 2 to 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.